association of white supremacy. He's guilty by his own admission of blowing up a building. And he was very clear about why he chose that building and what motivated him, what actions the US government had taken for which he had to strike back. And he didn't say anything about race. He didn't say anything about brown people or supremacy or our land. What he said was the FBI and other federal agencies have been militarized. They are treating American citizens like enemies, enemy combatants, and he was specifically angry about the attacks on Waco and Ruby Ridge. Did NPR mention Waco or Ruby Ridge? No, of course not. Of course not. Those things are way down the memory hole. No, they have recontextualized the Oklahoma City bombing as white supremacy because everything has to be about race, because we can't have the multiracial working class finding any sort of common cause or solidarity with one another. We need to keep them at each other's throats. We need to keep the managerial class, the professional managerial class, feeling smug and superior. And we need to keep everybody focused away from the people with all the money and the power. So, NPR, good job. You are carrying your water with aplomb. Good on you. 6 Sigma 6. Dogecoin pumps and dumps to further enrich these 0.001%. I saw that. I don't follow Dogecoin. I don't even know where to buy it. But I follow Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I noticed that they both took a dive a few days ago. Not a huge dive, like, I don't know, a few percent. From the mid 60s, like 64,000 or something, down to around 52,000. But they've both since recovered. Bitcoin's not above 60,000 as of right now, as far as I know, but it's recovered significantly. And when Bitcoin took that dive, I bought some. Not a lot, because I don't have a lot. I don't have a lot to spend. But yes. Pump started just when stimmy checks reached the mob. I guess it did jump up a little bit, but Bitcoin has been on a tear for many months now. I mean, it has grown. It's been above 50,000 for months. So I don't see the stimulus checks as having pumped it up that much. 6 Sigma 6 says $10 billion wealth transfer today. From who to whom? Or from whom to whom? All right, so, I'm not trying. I'm not deliberately trying to get kicked off of YouTube again. But I know that speaking about race and saying anything other than white people suck, the police are horrible to black people, but nobody else. I mean, that's the only thing you can really say in the mainstream narrative and not instantly be called a Nazi. And, Nazis get booted and punched in the face, booted from YouTube and punched in the face on the street in real life. I'm not trying to get booted off of YouTube, but, James Corbett just got not only suspended from YouTube, they erased his whole frickin' channel. He had been on there for 14 years. Doing consistent, high-quality work. I mean, the guy's got a work ethic that I cannot approach. And he brought so many people to YouTube. Now, he also picked up a huge audience from YouTube because much as they deny it, the YouTube algorithms do take you by the hand and lead you down the rabbit hole into some very strange and extreme, worldviews. Although James Corbett, from my perspective, is the most respectable of conspiracy theorists. And, he cops to being a conspiracy theorist, but he does it with integrity. He's not grasping at straws. He's mostly just reading from official documents and pointing out statements that powerful people have made in the open, in the media, on the record, saying, they actually said it. Look at what they said. Anyway, he got kicked off. Although haven't been listening to his podcast regularly, but I listened to the most recent one, where he's talking about getting kicked off. And he says, to his followers, look, you all know, I've told you again and again, I'm going to get kicked off. It is inevitable. So this comes as a surprise to nobody, but it's still aggravating. It's still irritating. But he's wise. I mean, he's got all his stuff backed up on Library and Minds.com and Archive.org, and, nothing of his was destroyed except the audience that he had accumulated over 14 years on YouTube. I mean, if YouTube, flushed my channel down the toilet tomorrow, hundreds of videos that I don't have stored anyplace else would be lost, but they wouldn't, from my perspective, it wouldn't be a great loss, really. Oh, I've jabbered so long, my computer has gone to sleep, I cannot see the chat. Let's see what we've got. From Doge backers to the pockets of, yes, well, Dogecoin, I think the, what is it, the Shinu Ibu, or what's the name of that dog? Yeah, that Japanese purebred dog, cute as heck. I really like it. As for the face of that dog, providing value to a digital coin, a cryptocurrency, it's not that I don't care. I know that Elon Musk tweeted something positive about Dogecoin once, and it jumped up in value as a result. I guess, if it's built on the same sort of blockchain technology, it's as valuable, or could be potentially as valuable as Bitcoin or Ethereum, but I just don't know a lot about it. Shiba Inu, yes, thank you, Sigma 6. Inu means dog in Japanese. So that makes sense. Alrighty. Well, hey, ask me a question, give me a topic, or I'll just keep swimming in these dangerous waters, and I should probably talk about stamp collecting, although I know less about stamp collecting than I do about cryptocurrency, and that's not saying much. What else? I could tell you about the comic, the Geb comic strip. We do these comics, and they're a web comic, but when enough of them accumulate, we put out a printed comic book, and I've done too much setup. We're like approaching the halfway point in what would be a printed comic book, and we're definitely still in Act 1. So I'm thinking now that a lot of the pages that I've done for the Act 1 of the webcomic of this current chapter are going to have to get condensed and sort of summarized in the print comic book. But hey, that's good, right? That way people who follow it in real time, from week to week on the website, they're going to get stuff that people who just read the printed book are not going to get. And vice versa. The printed book is going to have some full page spreads and some big, front and cover, back cover, full page art, and that's stuff that doesn't fit into the online web presentation. So you got to get them both. As soon as the store, where, the storefront is set up on the Geb website, where you can get printed copies of the book, I will let you know. And please do. If you read the Geb comic and you see anywhere where you can post a review, please do. That would help me out a lot. Alrighty. Hikane says, Doge is meme. Dogecoin is a meme coin. Its value is directly linked to the meme of buying Dogecoin. All right. And who's to say that there's not value in that? I've been talking about making NFTs, non-fungible tokens, out of some of my art. But it's not free to make an NFT. It can cost $100 or more. And my concern has been that I would spend the money to convert a piece of art into an NFT, and then either it wouldn't sell, or it wouldn't sell even enough for me to recoup the cost of minting it. And somebody wrote to me and they said, yeah, that's right. You have to be famous first. You have to have a name, you have to have an audience and a reputation. You have to be known before you can issue an NFT and expect to make any money off of it. And I think that's probably right. So he and I are going to have a powwow about that. I should say no more since the powwow hasn't happened yet. All right. 6 Sigma 6. Who gets the NFT money? Well, the attractive thing for me about an NFT is that, it's because it's crypto and it's on the blockchain, you can incorporate into it a smart contract whereby every time it changes hands, the original artist gets a percentage of the sale, or the original minter of the coin gets a percentage of the sale. So potentially, if people really did start buying and collecting NFT artwork, and it wasn't a fad, if it really developed into something so that people were actually seeking out older pieces, or certain collector's items, a piece could change hands repeatedly. And, it's kind of a bummer for artists who weren't famous in their lifetime, like Van Gogh or Van Gogh. It sounds Klingon, Van Gogh. He never made much money from his art, but now his paintings sell for tens of millions of dollars. He doesn't get any of that. his kids, I don't think he had any kids, but if he had family, if he had people, what do you call people who inherit your stuff? Anyway, if he'd had people like that, they don't get any of that. A closer to my heart example is the two guys who created Superman. They got paid. It was work for hire. They got paid a set fee to do a comic book. They did that comic book. They created a character which turned into this multi-million-dollar, decades-long cash cow, and they didn't see any of that. I think eventually, like many decades later, DC threw them a bone, but they certainly didn't. They didn't reap the benefits of creating this enormous cultural sensation because it was work for hire. So anything that helps artists get paid, and which takes a little bit of the control back from the people who don't create the art but who own it because they had the money to pay the artist to create the stuff. I'm glad that such arrangements exist. I mean, that's how I pay my rent. But particularly in comics, in the history of comic books, Marvel, DC, it was a fairly unscrupulous business, and artists just got the shaft regularly. And one thing that an artist can do to make money is, they create the art, and then the art goes to the publisher, it goes to the printer, it gets photographed. Then the art could be returned to the artist. I mean, it is a physical piece of art that they created. You could return it to the artist, and then they could keep it, sell it, whatever. But for a time, Marvel Comics would then shred the original art. Shred it, just run it through a shredder, destroy it. Why? That was just the ethos of that business. So I look for opportunities, to be enthusiastic, to be optimistic. And the NFT smart contract that allows an artist to keep getting paid repeatedly for their art as their art increases in value and changes hands, I like that idea. I would definitely like to get in on that if it becomes a reality. Ben Rubber says, I didn't try to fit my comment in the chat here, but I put it on your YouTube community post you posted a couple of hours ago if you want to go read it. All right. I will go and read it. Let's see. Hey, there's me live. How do I find that chat or that post? Go to YouTube Studio. It's weird. I discovered that I could post and people would actually, like a text post to YouTube and people would see it, but I never see text posts on YouTube. Alrighty, one comment. Of course, it's not a hot link. About here. Okay, Ben Rubber says, or wrote. I'll put in a starter since I haven't made the comment on your channel yet. Regarding your recent video on NPR about how they made the declaration that Timothy McVeigh was, without a doubt, influenced by... See, they didn't say influenced by white supremacy. It was a super short piece, and they just stated flat out. They didn't insinuate, they didn't suggest, they just stated flat out that he bombed the federal building because of his hatred for the government and white supremacy. Point blank, period, end of the story, next item. It was a very short piece, and they just asserted that it was motivated by white supremacy. Regarding your recent video on NPR about how they made the declaration that Timothy McVeigh was without a doubt influenced by white supremacy as a blanket statement lumped in with his hatred of government, the closest thing I could recall from my recent years of structural racism interests is that whenever a white male commits an act of violence, it's just an example of white male privilege somehow. A right to violence is a trait attributed to white supremacy. I forget how that ties in. Interesting to consider the black man who recently attacked and killed one Capitol police officer with a knife. A book I've yet to read that I expect carries this thread is by Kathleen Belew, or Below, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, it's Belew, Bring the War Home, the White Power Movement and Paramilitary America. I listened to an interview with her on Sam Harris's podcast. The short of it is that there are lots of examples of how troops come home disgruntled from fighting in a forever war that makes no sense to them. Some may have a sense of how power benefits from our pointless GDP serving forever wars, and may be ripe for the to be radicalized by neo-Nazi organizations. They offer community and a sympathetic ear to people suffering from PTSD in neglected areas of the country. They offer a high-fructose, simplified conspiracy worldview to take comfort in. I was amazed after finding out from Andy No's Twitter that he linked body cam footage of the police shooting the 13-year-old boy, that he was armed and tossed his gun in the same motion that he turned to the police and put his hands up. I listened to a few minutes of NPR and they thoroughly omitted that he had a weapon. No mention whatsoever. Just references to unfair treatment to dark-skinned people by police. Maybe they just hadn't gotten that information yet. And actually, Ben Rubber put a question at the end there. Maybe they just hadn't gotten the information yet? Sarcastically, obviously they omitted it, to make the facts that they're willing to report fit the narrative that they are going to support. So, you're probably not expecting this. Or maybe you are. If you know me, this will come as no surprise. But if you just know the current controversy, black people are relentlessly victimized by police. Some people say that's the case. Other people say absolutely not. The police are heroic and, heroic public servants. I'm of the opinion that for the most part, the police suck. They really suck. And I've had bad treatment at the hands of police. Me, a white guy, middle-aged white guy. And I even had my teeth at the time. I should have put them in before coming over here. I think the police are a problem. I think that the police in general are bullies. I think they are not prepared to use their power. I mean, they've been granted enormous power. They have the power to kill you. They have the authority to end your life if you fail to obey their commands. And, a lot of these guys, they're not Buddhas. They're not saints. They do abuse their power. What I don't like is this narrative that says they only abuse black people. No, they abuse anybody they think they can get away with abusing, which is to say people who can't afford a lawyer. If you're driving a nice car, if you're wearing a good suit, if you look like you have money, they realize that they can't hassle you without having to atone for it later, without having to account for their actions in court with their lawyer grilling, with your lawyer grilling their lawyer. They don't want that. But if you're driving an old beat-up pickup truck, if you're wearing torn jeans and you're missing some teeth, it doesn't matter what color your skin is, they're going to give you shit. They're going to give you shit. They're going to treat you. They're going to assume that you're a criminal. They're going to put their hands on you. It does not matter what color you are. It is your economic class that determines how the police treat you. And NPR and CNN and all the mainstream media, except for the far right ones, which take just a cartoonishly, photo-negative contrary opinion, they all insist that no, it is black people who are uniquely victimized by police. Now, a lot of black people catch a lot of shit from a lot of police. That happens. But most people who get beat up by police, most people who get killed by the police are white people. And that, if you say that in the mainstream media these days, well, you can't say it in the mainstream media. But if you say it on YouTube, am I still on? Is the stream still going? I mean, I'm shocked. This actually, the YouTube algorithm and the banhammer doesn't work in real time for the most part. The last time when I was here in the studio and the stream cut out, it was for a sin committed a couple days before that. But no, I mean, that's the thing that I don't like. That I know a lot of people who used to be Blue Tribe, but they don't have money and they can't really roll with the increasingly sort of Maoist line of the Blue Tribe. What I hate to see is for somebody who is slightly disgruntled go from being dyed-in-the-wool Blue Tribe to dyed-in-the-wool Red Tribe. That is not a sensible shift to make. There is a thing called Heterodox Thinker. Now, I know, according to the Blue Tribe and NPR, heterodox is just code for Nazi, but it's not. Heterodox means that you are not orthodox for either tribe. You think about things. You come to your own conclusions on various topics, and sometimes you might agree with the Blue Tribe, sometimes you might agree with the Red Tribe, sometimes you think they're both insane. I mean, they are both insane, clearly, but so are a lot of us in the Gray Tribe, or, the outsiders. We've been driven nuts by this environment of insanity. Okay, I have not looked at the chat in a long time. Let me look at the chat. What do we got? Oh, that's not Restream, that's Yelp. Ah. Oh goodness, I have so many tabs open. These, is it Favicon or Favicon? The icon that sits up in the browser tab to tell you, what's on a particular page. What is that? Long A or short A? What's your thought? I'd say put your answer in the chat, but since I'm not finding the chat, I won't see your answer. There we go. 6 Sigma 6. So what do we got here? Mushroom Mike says, HBD KMO. I remember you have the 420 crossover. Yes, it is April 20th. It is my 53rd birthday today. Hope you got a hold of good weed to celebrate. I'm actually not smoking weed these days. Just trying to increase my productive output and clear my head and get some writing done. And I have very fond memories and very positive associations of meeting people that I've never met before, smoking weed with them, and in so doing, bonding with them and just we all assure each other with this ritual, yes, when it was illegal, yes, you're cool, I'm cool, we're cool, it's all good. But for me, it's all good now to not smoke weed, which is ironic because I live in a place where it's legal. So, Gilla, Gill teens, Greta is 18 now. Okay, Greta is 18. Here, let me read a comment that somebody posted to the most recent C-Realm podcast episode. Because actually it's a Vault episode, but somebody had asked me about Greta Thunberg. And they had shared a report from a guy named Paul Kingsnorth, a British guy who's one of the founders of the Dark Mountain Project, and he's a novelist and I think a poet. Very, very smart guy. And a guy whose opinion I'm interested in, who interestingly just converted to Christianity, and not any sort of Christianity, but like Romanian Orthodox Christianity of the Irish variety. But Paul Kingsnorth had reported that when Greta Thunberg was taking the sailboat across the Atlantic to speak to the UN, she was doing that so as not to have the carbon excesses of a plane ticket, a plane flight on her conscience. But apparently she was on her phone the whole time. While the sailors were sailing the boat, she was staring at her phone, as most young folk do, and I do too. I'm not casting aspersions there. And it was this listener's impression that Paul Kingsnorth was saying that she had a greater carbon footprint using her phone, activating servers in distant places. The electricity that your phone uses is not just the electricity that charges the battery. It is the electricity that powers the servers, which basically enact your commands at a great distance. And he was saying that she used up, her being on her phone the whole time had a big carbon footprint and sort of undermined her, sailing instead of flying. But that's not the whole story. I mean, the whole story is she's not a sailor and she doesn't have a sailboat. A crew assembled at, her end of her starting position. And how did they get there? Well, some of them flew to get there. The crew assembled. They sailed across the Atlantic with her. And then she disembarks, and then some of the crew got on planes and flew home. They were going to leave the boat there so they could bring her back, but in the meantime, they were going to go home, so they flew home. And then when it was time for her to come home again, they flew back to New York, they crewed up again on the boat, and they sailed her across the Atlantic again. So to save her one round-trip plane flight, multiple people made round-trip flights. So, not her... This was the textbook definition of a virtue signal. I'm going to make a big deal about not flying because flying is bad. Flying puts a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. And yet, in order to enact this virtue signal, she put lots more carbon into the atmosphere than she would have if she'd just gotten on the damn plane and flown to New York. But of course, that would undermine the whole spectacle. So, comments. I explained that on a podcast recently. And Leet Minion, who has been a long time, very consistent contributor of high quality feedback, mostly from the Blue Tribe perspective, wrote to say, "Why so much ink for Thunberg, KMO?" Well, I was answering a question from somebody who had written to me. Leet Minion continues, "I get she's annoying," in italics, annoying, haranguing the elites for not having fixed the problem already, and surely too open to solutions that let them keep their yachts or whatever. Solutions that, if successful, big if, deliver only the pittance, legitimately, compared to what could be on the table of a habitable planet. But there are other jet-setting professional activists who are overtly against even mitigating most of the problems you consider important to solve. The Koch brothers, for example. They're the far foe, though, and surely very serious and not annoying. They don't need to rely on harangues or stunts or clout when they can just write very large checks. So, what's there to say? So this isn't the end of his feedback, but I'll pause here and I'll say that Charles Koch, David Koch, the Koch brothers, I think there were 4 of them, but usually when you say the Koch brothers, you're thinking of David and Charles. David died a couple years ago, I think. Charles is the remaining Koch brother. When I left Amazon.com in 1998, one of the first things I did was travel to Washington, D.C. to attend a conference at the Cato Institute. And the conference was called Beyond Prohibition, Finding a Sane Drug Policy for the 21st Century. So the Cato Institute is a libertarian think tank in Washington, D.C. And they put on this event where they had Gary Johnson, then governor of New Mexico, who was against prohibition. They had Ethan Nadelman of the Drug Policy Alliance, I think, in New York City, a very fiery, passionate speaker. If you've never heard Ethan Nadelman speak against the drug war, you just type his name into YouTube right now. He's he's a force of nature. PJ O'Rourke was there, and I was really tickled because, my last name is O'Connor, and all the attendees were listed in a printed pamphlet, not a pamphlet, but like a program that they handed out. And my name was right next to PJ O'Rourke's in the pamphlet. But anyway, all of this was put on by the Cato Institute. The Cato Institute is funded by the Koch brothers. The Cato Institute, yes, it's a libertarian think tank. They are against, raising a minimum wage. They're against universal health care. The Koch brothers, they made their money, a lot of it, in fossil fuels. This is the thing that is their biggest sin from my perspective. They deliberately muddy the waters by funding, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD. They fund fear, uncertainty, and doubt around, climate scientists, not the climate, but climate scientists running amok spreading fear. I know I've got Colin's attention here. All right. So from my perspective, the Cato Institute is a mixed bag. They're against the drug war. I'm against the drug war. They're against climate, excesses in the name of fighting climate. And I don't even care to enter into that arena. I just don't. I don't think there are very many players who are not grinding an axe, who don't have an agenda, who are part of that discussion. I don't think there's much politically neutral climate science or climate science reporting going on. Is the climate changing? Probably. Is human activity causing it? Well, it's certainly, I would guess, contributing to it. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Put more of it into the atmosphere, the Earth's atmosphere will retain some of the heat it otherwise would have radiated. That seems pretty obvious to me, but how big a deal is it? I don't know. I don't know, and I don't believe anybody actually knows. I got the thumbs up from Colin on that one. Alrighty. So from my perspective, the Koch brothers, yes, one, they're not annoying. They don't stand up in front of the UN and scream and say, how dare you have ruined the world for me and my generation. They don't have to. They're super rich. They just write a check and boom, here's a think tank. Write another check, boom, here's a building, a big new shiny building at a university somewhere, and boom, they've endowed a chair. There's now a faculty member whose job exists because Charles Koch wrote a check. So, that's how they work. And they're in no hurry. Somebody like Greta Thunberg, her age, they want to see change right this minute, because if it's going to take until they're 21, well, that's forever. They can't wait. Whereas, old rich guys, yeah, I almost said old rich white guys, and the Koch brothers are white. Old guys, they play a long game, and they don't need to see obvious dramatic results tomorrow. I remember when Andrew Yang was running for president, and not only did I favor him, I sent money to his campaign. I actively supported him. And I'd make videos and I'd talk about how much I liked Andrew Yang. I'd say, he's not going to win this time. There's no reason to think that he's going to get the nomination, much less become president in 2020. But I really like him, and I think he's on track to have a really promising, fruitful political career and really be a contributor to a more sensible politics in the years going forward. And man, his followers did not want to hear that. I mean, so many of them said, if he doesn't win this time, if it doesn't go our way this time, the world will end. Everything will fall apart. It will be too late to do anything. It's never too late. I mean, when the sun swells and encompasses the earth, and the earth is still going around, the center of gravity of the sun, but it's actually below the surface of the sun, yes, then it's too late. Then it's over. But politically, even if we have a revolution, I know a lot of you want a revolution, I don't, but even if we have a revolution, even if, if real, legitimate, swastika-wearing Nazis take power and make fertile women wear red dresses, and become handmaids, if that actually happens, there's still room for deliberate action, for considered action, for collaboration and community, and there is the opportunity and the possibility to make things better from that point. So it's never too late, all caps, too late, triple exclamation point, overdone. The world just doesn't work that way, except for it's too late to have a different present than the one we have. Sure. And it could have been different, probably. But, this idea that, well, here we are now, a couple years later. Yeah, Andrew Yang's not president. He's running for New York City, and he is the leading candidate. And it is amazing. It is hilarious to watch CNN and the New York Times and all the rest of the supposedly liberal mainstream media try everything they can to discredit him and destroy his candidacy. They've accused him of being a sexist. They've accused him of being a racist. They've accused him of being the wrong kind of Asian, of not supporting Asians in the way they needed to be supported. This nutty guy came up to him the other day and said, is it okay to leave your Timbs, which is to say your Timberland boots on, while you're, I don't remember the phraseology he used, but, making love with your woman? And Andrew Yang's response was, well, that's entirely up to her. If your partner agrees, it's between you two. And then the guy went on to say something, I won't even try to approximate his exact wording, but basically says, if your woman is not behaving properly, can you hit her? And he laughed nervously, made a gesture like, okay, this conversation is done, and turned away. And, the mainstream media treated that as if he laughed in enjoyment, as in, ha ha, yeah, you're right, absolutely, hit that woman. They tried to sell that. They actually tried to sell that. So it is amazing. I'm so grateful to have Andrew Yang still doing his thing and really bringing out the vicious, vile hypocrisy of the mainstream corporate media and having them demonstrate with no ambiguity whatsoever who they serve. And it's not you, and it's not me, and it's not working people, and it is not the majority of voters in New York City. They serve the wealthy, the powerful, the oligarchy. They serve the aristocracy. And it couldn't be more clear. So New York Times, CNN, NPR, keep at it. You guys are doing an amazing job. Amazing. All righty, let's see if I can find that chat window again. I really should just drag it all the way over to the right. And I will the next time I find it. All righty. I'm doing what I should do much more often, and that is closing tabs. It's so easy to reopen them again. And yet I let them proliferate. Love that word. It is a great word. Proliferate. It's not just that it's multisyllabic. Proliferate. It's that all those consonants, there's a nice there's a nice rhythm to it. There are not consonants bunched up together. There's a consonant sound, vowel sound, consonant sound, vowel sound. Proliferate, and then it ends with a terminal T. One of my favorites. Now I do love when consonants come together in like the LTH formulation, like wealth or tilth. Love those words. Anyway, Oswald Spengler says, Yang did a show with Justin Amash, the libertarian representative from my hometown in Michigan, Betsy DeVos's area. Yang did oh, okay. I'm seeing most comments twice. Cool. I mean, another thing that the mainstream media, they tried, this is back when he was running for president, they tried to denigrate him and cast shade on him for not speaking to, for not reaching out to the public through the mainstream media outlets, but going, to these sort of suspicious new media outlets and talking to people like Joe Rogan. That's suspicious and sketchy. Suspicious and sketchy. Suspicious. I like it. There's a new word for today. Suspicious. Suspicious and sketchy simultaneously. But, he didn't have the opportunity. They didn't acknowledge that he was running for the longest time. They would leave his name off of polls where he was performing higher than some of the people they wanted to favor, like Kamala Harris, who was doing terribly. Andrew Yang was regularly polling higher than her, or Cory Booker. And then, eventually he's on stage. They have to turn the camera on him occasionally, but they turn his microphone off. Ben Rubber says, one of two. Your comments on how the sailors flew round trip remind me of how a poor family sharing a vehicle drives to a workplace twice to drop off and pick up someone who is working. Yeah. Except the thing is, there was no have to in that whole Greta sails across the ocean thing. She could have flown, but here's my real beef with Greta Thunberg, and it's not with her. I have no problem with her. She's a teenager. And she's angry. Fine. That's a great time to be angry. You can be angry as a teenager just as a function of your biology. You don't even have to know anything that would make you angry, particularly if you're male, but she's not. What I find irritating is that she didn't through force of will seize the global microphone and, just project herself onto screens worldwide. She didn't do that. Adults who saw her as a useful implement, a useful mouthpiece, plucked her up out of her skipping school to go protest, climate change, and put her on a global stage. But what does she bring to the conversation? She's not a scientist, and one thing she shares with many scientists is she's not a good communicator. All she brings is indignation and a set of, hindrances and identity issues which insulate her from criticism. I'll go no further with that. Ben Rubber says one of two. So what's two of two? Still typing, I imagine. Alrighty. We probably got to get out of here in about 15 minutes. So get your questions in now. I'll take a break and give a message from our sponsor. Well, there is no sponsor to this episode. And I'm not opposed to sponsorships. I'm just too lazy to seek them out, really. And my audience is too small to make it worth anybody's time. Brilliant analysis, says 6 Sigma 6. 6 Sigma 6, your moniker is hard to say aloud. 6 Sigma 6. And often your comments, I have great trouble making sense of them. But I do appreciate that you're regularly here to make such comments. Okay, Ben Rubber continues. This seems relevant to Greta's sailing virtue signaling. Are we impoverished of a culture that maximizes sailing laborers and technology? If we have fossil fuel energy, then just burn that instead. So are we impoverished of a culture that maximizes sailing laborers and technology? I don't quite get your question. Um, the motive force in a sailboat or in sailing is the wind. It's not muscle power. So sailing doesn't necessarily, replace fossil fuel energy with muscle power or, caloric energy. It uses the wind, which would be blowing anyway. I think sailing is neat. I've only done it once, and I feared seasickness because I used to work on a fishing boat where I suffered with seasickness for days on end. And it was after the fishing boat period that I got to go sailing. And I took so much Dramamine that after about half an hour on the water, I had to go below deck and just take a long nap. So I missed most of the day sailing. Ed the Willing. Ed in Montreal says, "Isn't 420 your birthday? Happy birthday, KMO." It is my birthday. Thank you, Ed. Yes, I am 53 years old today. It seems like I just turned 50. It's like the big round numbers, like 40 and 50. It seems like you should get to sit there for a while and really enjoy 50, or, really get comfortable at 50 and figure out how to be 50. But it's like every other year. As soon as you've got it sort of, locked in, it's over. 420 is Hitler's birthday. Yes, it is. I didn't choose it. He didn't choose it. It is what it is. 420 is also the day that Harris and Klebold shot up Columbine High School. I remember the day that happened. It was my birthday. Fortunately, I didn't hear about it until late in the day, so it didn't ruin the day on the day. Happy B-Day, KMO. I share mine with J.R.R. Tolkien. Well, that's freaking cool. A much better birthday mate than Hitler. I will agree. I never will read a book by Adolf Hitler. As far as I know, he only wrote one, and I don't care to read it. But I will spend many, many more hours of my life reading the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Not for the first time, but they certainly bear rereading time and again. Speaking of reading books, one of the things that people they reference in order to assert that there's a connection between Timothy McVeigh's actions and white supremacy is that he read and apparently thought highly of the book The Turner Diaries. And a few years ago, John Michael Greer, a blogger an author that I follow and have spoken to many times, he was giving sort of reading assignments to his followers, and he was challenging them. And he said, we're all caught up in the present moment. Most of us don't read, but those of us who do read, we tend to shy away from older books. He said, read a book that's more than 100 years old. So I had never read Uncle Tom's Cabin. And I went and I read Uncle Tom's Cabin because it was over 100 years old. I was actually kind of shocked. Uncle Tom, as a figure, Uncle Tom is a current day epitaph. It's like a curse. A black man who is too compliant, who is too willing to obey white authorities is called Uncle Tom. But the character in the novel, he gets sold off from a relatively comfortable life on a tobacco farm in Kentucky. He goes and he lives in the home of this very wealthy guy who treats his slaves very permissively. Basically, the slaves run the house. Like, they come back. Actually, Tom is being transported downriver, and he saves the life of this rich guy's daughter who falls overboard. And so the rich guy buys him and takes him into his home. And, Tom lives a very good life there, except that, his wife and kids are still on the tobacco farm in Kentucky. And he would like to, live with his family. But as a slave in the South, and this was in New Orleans, you couldn't ask for a better, sort of situation. So Tom's there for a while. But then this rich guy who is very permissive with his slaves gets killed in a knife fight. And he hasn't made up a will. And basically his wife, who is just an awful person, decides to go live in her father's plantation, and she just sells all the slaves. Just sells them all. And Tom gets sold on to a cotton plantation run by a guy who has come to the brilliant realization that, he used to spend a lot of money on doctors for his slaves when they got sick. And then he realized, for the same amount of money, I can just work them to death and buy more. And so he also discovered that black people can't give testimony. And so if he doesn't keep any other white people on the plantation, if he only has black overseers on the plantation, then he can treat his slaves as cruelly as he wants to. and nobody can give, testimony against him. And he wants to make Tom an overseer. And Tom, who is a good Christian man and very strong in his faith, absolutely refuses to wield a whip. He will not whip slaves. And that's his job. That would be his job as an overseer. And so the overseer, or the owner of the plantation, says to his other two overseers, who are slaves, beat this guy into submission or kill him. Beat him to death if he never relents. And they do. They beat him to death. So Uncle Tom is a guy whose Christian faith and unwillingness to harm other people was so strong that he was willing to be beaten to death rather than wield the whip himself. That's Uncle Tom. So another assignment from John Michael Greer, another reading assignment is, okay, now that you've read a book that's 100 years old, read a book you expect you'll disagree with. Well, for this one, I chose the Turner Diaries. And I started reading it. And I didn't get very far with it. And I wasn't offended by it, although, it's certainly, it's an offensive book, but that's not why I couldn't finish it. It's just, it was so poorly written. It was just, people in the story, if they're not one of the main characters, they have no humanity at all. Like very early on in the book, the main character, he's in his home, and, agents come to the door, armed agents of the state, and some of them are black, and the black people he just calls blacks. He says, this black did that. This black did this. It's like, you may disagree with them, you may not think they're your equal, but they are in fact entities in the world. These are conscious, rational agents. I as a reader, I cannot accept the reality that you're presenting. Not because I disagree with it. It's just you're not presenting it in a way that makes it something I can latch onto and actually accept, even provisionally, as a story. It was very, very weak storytelling. And, just incompetent storytelling, really. And I wasn't offended by it. It just didn't hold me. I couldn't hang with it. Sometimes I think I, will read it because it's in my Kindle library. Amazon made a little money from that sale. But I'm sure I'll never get back to it. So today I went to see if there was a free audiobook version of it. And there is. Somebody has, made a video of themselves just reading the Turner Diaries, and I have it open in a browser tab. Will I listen to it? Probably not. All right. More comments. What do we got? We Create Our Story says the local sheriff's office will not have an on-record conversation with me, and they're filtering comments on Facebook. It seems like maybe I missed something here. I don't see any previous messages from you, so if that's supposed to be a familiar situation to me, it's not. But We Create Our Own Story continues. When the means are there, but the demand isn't. Oswald Spengler says, KMO, do you still follow Jason Horsley's work at all? He just moved to Spain and is starting a commune of some sort. I did not know that. Jason Horsley, who was an early podcaster like me, who the first podcast that he did, I think it was his first, was called Stormy Weather, and he did it under the alias, what was it, AFS Cafus or something like that. The last I heard from him, he was talking with Jim Kunstler. Like, he and Jim Kunstler are friends, and they've done some pretty cool long-form podcast conversations together. So that was the last I heard from Jason Horsley. So, commune in Spain? Jason's kind of been a bit of a cult leader before. He's had situations where, like, he treated his audience more like the members of his cult community and would sometimes interrogate them on podcasts, and assert his psychological authority over them in podcasts, which is interesting to hear about. I can well imagine him as a cult leader. He's a very soft-spoken guy. So imagine, the soft-spoken cult leader who, has lieutenants to be the heavies, the bad cops. Ed says, KMO, do you think that the Unabomber wrote well? When I first read his material in the 90s, I was looking for an excuse not to read it, and I said it was poorly written at the time. I have since reread Industrial Society and Its Future many times, And I can't say that it's poetic. I can't say that the prose flows, but he does get his point across very lucidly and clearly. So, to some extent, yeah, I think he wrote well. I mean, he's not dead. He still writes. Oswald Spengler says, the author of the Turner Diaries, William Luther Pierce, was a professor at Oregon State University. Very ironic that very ironic that that uni is very entrenched in the PC education industry. Well, I'm sure everybody knows that when Oregon was incorporated as a state, it's in their state constitution that black people cannot reside in the state. They have since relented on that score. But yeah, there's a long history of racist, very racist cultural conservatism in Oregon. And if you get outside of Portland, it's still there. I mean, drive through Eastern Oregon. Good God, I broke down in Eastern Oregon. Oswald Spengler says, at Chasm Out, she's talking to Ed, so I will let you guys talk amongst yourselves. Oswald Spengler says, the Unabomber wasn't nearly as shoddy of a writer as Hitler was. Well, again, I'm never going to read Mein Kampf. I'll listen to somebody's summary of it if it's relevant to something that I'm studying, but life is short. There's, most books I will never read. So the fact that Mein Kampf is one of those many books that I will never read, it's no loss to me. But yeah, I probably will reread Industrial Society in its future. How are we doing on time there, Colin? Okay. Colin says, so everybody in the chat, thanks for joining me. YouTube algorithms, thanks for overlooking me if you really did. I'll talk to y'all later.